I'm Heather Wright. I work for Carers Link. I have a contract with them to provide support and information to carers around about autistic spectrum. My background is that I was an occupational therapist and I have some experience with some of the issues in my sons. My aim is to provide information for the carers on how to support autism. Today I want to look at some of the very brief introduction around about what impacts autism has for the individual and by that nature on yourselves. The diagnosis for autism will come through 4 points. The first is to look for a developmental delay. This will be a developmental issue, not necessarily a cognitive intelligence issue, more a problem with the 3 impacts of communication, social interaction and imagination. Although 75% of the individuals may well have an additional learning problem with an low IQ, that doesn't mean that many people will have an average to above average intelligence level. Having looked for this developmental problem, we then go on to look for the triad of impairments: problems with communication, social interaction and imagination and understanding. That imagination and understanding is not about creativity, it's around about being able to imagine yourself in a different setting, to project yourself into that setting. This has an impact, 5 specific impacts. So if we want to look at the 5 impacts of autism, we look at communication, the 3 theories, which are theory of mind, central coherence and executive skills, and sensory processing differences. We'll start with communication. This breaks down into the interpretation of language and the presentation of language. Some of our individuals may not have a problem with presenting language, but they are still likely to have a problem with interpreting it. This shows as a processing delay, so they have problems with the time span it takes to process the information. This could be a couple of seconds, or it could be anything up to 15 seconds. The average is about 6. This means that the more information you give, the longer the sentence, the more words, the more difficult it is for that person to process that information through sheer volume. The other problem is if that information is what we would call complex. Complex doesn't necessarily mean big words. It can mean that the meaning is difficult to understand. So if you say, "Could you do something?" you're not actually giving an instruction, you're using a question word like "could you," so they don't know that they're supposed to be doing something for you. The other problem would be something complex like a joke or sarcasm or a term such as "pull your socks up." Those are complex statements that don't actually say what they mean. And they may have difficulty with non-verbal communication. Some people will not give eye contact or give eye contact while you're speaking. This means that you tend to lose the non-verbal communication around about gesture. They're also not necessarily very good at picking up on volume or tone and can misunderstand that as well. So if you're shouting, it becomes confusing. So problems with non-verbal communication. When you're talking about production of communication, you may find that the person has an absence of desire to communicate. That's because communicating is actually hard work. If you can't read what other people are saying to you, do you want to get into a conversation when it's going to be so hard? So you will find that people will communicate only when they have a really good purpose to do so. Why use all that effort? So if they need something or want something, then they're likely to communicate with you. That communication may be verbal, it may not. You will also get some individuals who have very formal or stilted communication, or you may get unusual accents. We have a lot of American speakers who aren't American. We also have people who have problems with things like they will talk like cartoon characters or something of that nature. Echolalia and repetitive speech is unusual language. You will get people who will repeat in echolalia either the last word or whole sentences. You will also get people who will tend to use set phrases over and over and over again. Again, this is around about processing, and you may well find that the more stressed the person is, the more common it is to see these particular traits. And you can also get abnormalities in language and distortions, such as words that don't appear in the dictionary, or they can use terms in an unusual manner. So the rules of language can often be confused by individuals. So communication can be a problem both in processing and in presentation for some individuals. The theories of autism break into 3 settings. The first is theory of mind. Theory of mind is our ability to project ourselves into someone else's position, to identify the world from their point of view. And this ability helps us to understand why people behave in a particular way, the fact that they may have different opinions to us. And that's all about imagination, realising that although you think something, other people may not. I can imagine they have a different point of view. This is where the imagination in that triad of impairments comes from. It's really essential for us to be able to put ourselves in someone else's position to understand why somebody may be behaving in a particular way, why the social rules are set in a particular way. So you have to be able to put yourself into that setting, read why that person's behaving that way in that particular social situation, to be able to work out why and how you should respond to that. So it helps us to understand social rules as well as understanding people. The second theory is central coherence. Central coherence is about our understanding of context. We see a situation or carry out a particular task in a way that helps us to understand what we're supposed to be doing. So if you walk into a lounge, there's soft furnishings and there's an entertainment centre like a TV. So clearly the idea is to relax and sit down. So you get the context by the general image of the room. But if you have that image changed, does that mean that what you're supposed to be doing changes? So, do you see the furniture or do you see all the toys that are laying there? So is this a playroom? Am I supposed to be sitting watching TV or playing? Think of the classroom. If you've changed the classroom, does that mean that you're still supposed to do the lesson the same way? Or if the teacher is different, does that mean that the rules of the classroom still apply? Being able to read the routine and the structure and how to behave in that structure, in that environment, depends on your ability to read the signs. And our individuals with central coherence problems often get distracted by the detail and can't work out the context. The third of these theories is executive skill. Executive skill is all about our planning, sequencing, organising, and our attention. Our ability to stay on track, to identify what we need to achieve and the stages to achieve that is about executive skill. To reach D, I need to start at A and do A, B, and C in order to get there. That's about sequencing, planning, starting, and stopping. Those are all executive skills. So to be able to do that, you have to have good executive skills. This is not about intelligence. This is a very specific problem and occurs in a lot of other conditions as well. But executive skill can be a problem even for our most intelligent individuals. It also affects our ability to make choices, to be able to identify the fors and againsts of different options and decide which one to choose. Stopping and starting is the main neurological issue within executive skill. Part of our brain helps us to stop, start a new task, stop again, start a new task. Every activity is made up of a sequence of tasks. So that ability is really important to be able to do that, and that's affected, which can result in people losing concentration, or in fact, the opposite, becoming quite fixated on something. It also affects our ability to adjust behaviour, because when we get to a stage where we become aroused or distressed, the ability to shift attention becomes much more difficult. So you may well find that your person ends up escalating quite quickly into distress and not being able to stop themselves when they do that. Last but by no means least, the fifth of these impacts is sensory problems. 97% of people on the spectrum have a sensory processing problem. That sensory processing problem comes in as registration problems, abnormal registration of sensory input, and control of our arousal level. That abnormal sensory registration can result in the well-known hypersensitivity of people. This is where folk register that information as being highly significant or a potential threat to them. So it becomes potentially painful at worst, distracting at best. So you will find that people will avoid those particular senses. Sound and sight are particularly common hypersensitives in our people on the spectrum. The opposite of this is hyposensitive. This is where the brain doesn't register that sensory information effectively. It will actually ignore it. So that sounds like not too bad a problem until you think maybe if you're ignoring pain. We end up with people with no good registration of pain who can actually walk about with quite severe injuries without showing any distress whatsoever. Pain and temperature control are big issues around our safety. So we need to make sure that our people can register these effectively. The opposite side of ignoring it is that the top areas of our brain actually demand that information. So you will actually get people who seek, just like you can't ignore a dead leg. You have to poke it, you have to shake it. This is hyposensitivity. You can't ignore important information which tells you where your body is. Therefore, you will get seeking behaviour, rocking, spinning, jumping up and down, seeking pressure. These type of things are common seeking behaviours within our folk and can be misconstrued as being naughty or disruptive behaviours. Arousal level is affected as well. Our ability to stay calm and composed and in control of ourselves depends on our arousal level. And our arousal level can be affected as well, both by the executive skill and the sensory processing problems. So we tend to think of the arousal thermometer. The arousal thermometer starts at blue, which is that I'm too low, sluggish type of me in the morning. For a lot of people, that can actually be an almost permanent situation. It's very easy to get over distracted or in fact be over aroused when you're in the blue phase. Small things annoy you because you're tired, because you're not switched on properly. Green is where we want people to be. That's your just right alert level. Most of us would probably be in that situation through a large part of the day. That's where you're functioning effectively, that's where you can concentrate, that's the safe space. But then when we start to get slightly stressed, that's when we move into the yellow phase. For a lot of our people, that's where they are most of the time. If you think of the 3 theories, you've got a world which is confusing and stressing. So, yellow level, you're still in control of yourself. You can just about put the strategies in place. You're stressed, you're struggling, but you're holding it together. By the time you start moving into the amber phase, you're not holding it together. You're having great difficulty coming up with strategies. You probably need help from somebody else to get your arousal level down. And it's quite easy to move from that yellow, I'm not in control stage into the red. By the time someone's in the red, they're in the fight, flight, freeze response. That's about survival. You're not going to get somebody actually helping you in that phase. And in fact, you probably can't help them. By the time you're at that phase, it's damage limitation. We want to help people stay in the yellow or down into the green phase. When we start to look at behaviours are what most people ask me questions about. The thing is, the behaviour is the tip of the iceberg. We use the iceberg tool. The iceberg tool identifies what is the behaviour. That's what's popping up on top of the water. That's what you see. But what's causing that? Under the water is so much more. Under the water is the cause of that behaviour and the outcome of that behaviour for the person. We cannot solve the problem if we don't know what the cause and the outcome is. The likely cause is one or more of those 5 impacts of autism, but you've got to work out which one. And sometimes by working out what the outcome for the person is, whether it's avoiding or seeking or controlling the environment, might help you to work out what those 5 are. But the big task is, what's the cause, what's the challenge? Then you can work out how to help minimise or prevent the behaviours, which are really just the person's way of coping. Going forward with the person is about being able to identify what those causes are. Carers link employ me to support that and provide that information. I provide formal training sessions. We have a 4-day course which carries out 4 sessions over 4 different days, normally about 2 to 2.5 hours each. The first one covers what is autism and what are the communication issues and strategies. Day 2 looks at what are those impacts, normally around about the 3 theories, and how do they affect behaviour and arousal. Day 3 is very much around about the sensory. It's all about sensory processing differences and how to control those and the arousal level. And day 4 is a practical strategies workshop around about how do we use the iceberg tool to sort out the meaning and understand what the behaviour achieves for the person and what strategies can we put in place. We also provide one-off sessions around about social stories, which are about helping person with that theory of mind understanding why people behave in a particular way. Structured environments, which are very much around about how to provide the structure which helps with central coherence and executive skills. Learning homework and beyond, which is very much about that school problems, which are so common for our young people and the parents. Management of aggression, which looks back very much across the whole planning and organising, with a little bit about how do we deal with the aftermath when it all goes wrong, as it so often does. I also offer one-to-one sessions for people who can't get to the training sessions or who have issues that they don't want to bring up in that group setting. There are great strengths of the group setting because you've got all the experience of the other people who are there as well. But just for some people, it just doesn't fit in with their lifestyles. So one-to-one sessions can be held at a time and a venue to suit yourselves. The information on all this is in the What's On, so if you receive that, you'll get that information. We also have a lot of this information available to download off the website. So if you want any more information around about any of this autism or information, or you want to book a place or an appointment, you should contact Carers Link. Good luck with your autistic person.